What's up, everybody? I'm David Hain. Welcome to episode number 247 of the A2D From Addict to Disciple podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the link with your friends. And I really want to challenge you, especially on these Wacky Wednesdays, as we're going through the chapters of the curriculum From Ashes to Destiny, that you should find some friends to dig into these discussion questions, because the deeper you dig as you're going through the curriculum, the better the chance of finding healing and solutions to your addiction. Today's episode, number 247, is entitled The Feeling of Being Alone. And this, again, is coming from the From Ashes to Destiny curriculum, Phase 2, which deals with heart wounds. And this is the first story from Chapter 7 of Phase 2. And this chapter is entitled The Heart That Feels Alone, Abandoned, or Rejected. So let me get into the story now, and then the questions that we use to discuss it. Larry, writing his life story while incarcerated in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania prison, said, "I grew up with basically my mother raising me alone. There was a couple of stepdads along the way, but none of them really had too much of an impact. As I look back on my childhood, it's hard to explain, but I don't remember feeling loved or hated. It seems like I was just there. Also, when I was real young, my mom was having a lot of problems. She had to give me and my next youngest brother up to deal with her problems. Luckily, it only lasted 2 weeks. To this day, I battle rejection and abandonment as I look back, and I can see the reasons why." Sure. Larry really getting in touch with his childhood wound there. So let's see what we can use for discussion from that. Number one, Larry was raised by a single mom and a couple of stepdads. How do you feel that impacted him as a child? And can you discuss your childhood home situation? What are the things in the parental dynamic that may have affected and impacted your childhood wounds? You know, it could be that both parents were there and it was a happy looking childhood and a happy household, but you saw arguments or fights or what have you. It could be a divorce and how that impacted your childhood. It could be, a mother or father who was always working and never around. Okay? So feel free to start sharing about that. Second question. Larry didn't remember feeling loved or hated. Did you ever feel like that? Did you ever feel like Larry when he said, I felt like I was just there? Have you ever felt like you were just there, like, as a child, you were no different than a sort of a piece of furniture, and no one really loved you enough to get into understanding you and what made you happy and what you were interested in, and no one was encouraging you, or no one really hated you, but they just disciplined you? Okay, number 3. Larry only spent 2 weeks in the child services system, but he battled rejection and abandonment the rest of his life. You got that? Only 2 weeks his mom had to give him and his sibling up to child services for foster care. And after 2 weeks, she was able to get them back. But somehow that wound of rejection and abandonment from just 2 weeks in child services haunted Larry the rest of his adult life. So I want to ask you, what wound from your childhood still haunts you today? Number 4, when have you felt alone? Can you remember times in your childhood that you felt alone? Maybe physically alone. You know, some people had shared a bedroom and then a sibling moved out and now they had a bedroom all to themselves and they felt alone. Their brother, their sister was gone. Their best friend was gone. Or can you remember when you felt alone emotionally? Could have been when no one listened to you, no one cared about your emotions, and so you ended up just keeping them to yourselves and felt like they weren't even worth sharing. Okay, question number 5. I've met many rebellious young men and women, and I say rebellious with quotes around it because that's what other people call them, who actually felt abandoned from the womb. They had this abandonment feeling literally from the womb. So maybe they were going to be put up for adoption. Maybe the mom just didn't want to have the baby but didn't want to get an abortion. And so there was no loving going on while the mom was pregnant. And that this created an abandonment wound that stayed dormant until they were in their teens, and then it sort of blossomed or awakened and they became rebellious teenagers when really they were confused and wondering why all this abandonment blossomed, at age 16, 17, 18 years old. So I want to ask you, can you remember any wound that seemed to awaken in your teens that got you labeled rebellious, but maybe it was a dormant wound of abandonment, rejection, or feeling alone? And it's time to discuss that. Number 6, what type of rejection have you experienced? Can you describe the pain of hearing the words, "I don't love you anymore," or "You're not my son or daughter anymore"? A lot of us in addiction have heard that "I don't love you anymore" as a spouse, a family member said, "I'm just done with you." And some of us have heard from parents, "You're not the son or daughter I raised," or "You're not my son or daughter anymore. Don't come home ever again. I don't want to see you. You're an embarrassment to me." So in this question, discuss the rejection that you have experienced and what you feel that did as far as fueling your addiction. Number 7, can you describe the need to self-medicate the pain of feeling alone, abandoned, or rejected? Why was the only option or the best option to self-medicate? Looking back, what other options could have, should have, you wish they would have been available, but they just weren't there. And so you were left to just self-medicate that pain. And the last question for today, how did you or can you find healing from that pain that you'd been self-medicating? Again, thanks for listening to this episode on feeling alone, abandoned, and rejected. If that stirred something in you, I want to encourage you to reach out, join a group, talk to a mentor, a coach, a sponsor, a friend in recovery, whatever. You can message me on the link in this podcast or by email at davidfroma2d@gmail.com. or go to my website, www.froma2d.org, and click on the contact page. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave your comments by clicking on the link they provide on that platform. Keep listening to future podcasts, and as always, stay safe and stay resilient.